Welcome to Guitar Gavel, a place for people who love guitars. These are conversations with musicians, guitar enthusiasts, techs, and collectors about their guitar journey and their love of the instrument. Thanks for tuning in. Please hit the subscribe button, share with your friends, and be sure to sign up for our twice-weekly newsletter at guitargavel.com. Hey everyone, myself and Keiran didn't manage to discuss his favorite music inside the time we had, but we felt that we had to tell you about an amazing band who are local to Westone, UK, and whose bass player kills it with a Westone Thunder. Georgia South on bass and Amy Love on vocals and guitar are a London-based punk rock duo called Nova Twins. They defy any genre that you might try to put them in, just like any Westone guitar. Check out their YouTube channel to hear them or catch them live while they are touring across Europe, UK, Australia, and Florida. Links are in the description below, and make sure you tell them Guitar Gavel and Westone UK sent you. Keep on rocking. Hey everybody, welcome to the Guitar Gavel podcast. I'm your host, David Still, and I first off want to start by saying thank you for everyone listening and watching for your time. It means so much to me and to our guests that you would take an hour or so out of your day to listen or watch the podcast, and really, really thank you for that. If you like what you hear or what you see, please give it a 5-star review or a thumbs up and leave us some comments. Guests would love to hear from you and would love to answer any of your questions on the back end after the show is over. So thank you very much for your time. Got a special episode or a special guest today and a special topic of conversation. Typically, we're kind of narrow or broad on our focus, I should say. One's guest guitar journey, maybe their career, but nonetheless, everything evolves or revolves around guitars, and today is no different. But I have my guest here, and I'm going to go slow with the name. It's Keiran Wynyard, and that's with a good Southern draw, and I'm about 90% there. You can correct me. And Keiran is kind of a jack of all trades in so many ways. He's a graphic designer, a product designer, clearly a guitar enthusiast. We can see by all the guitars hanging behind him, and the owner of the Westone brand, our owner of Westone in UK, I should say. And he's going to clarify all that. This is a long intro, Keiran, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to let you fill in all the gaps as I do with all my guests, but I will stop there and say thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being here. And we're running about 4 hours or 5 hours off in different time zones. So it's afternoon there, it's morning here, and so glad to have you.
Well, thank you for the invite, David. It's glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, appreciate it. I'm just excited about today because the Westone brand is very significant. The factory where it was manufactured is very significant in the lineage of guitars all over the world. And I'm going to throw you under the bus and at least say, if you're not an expert, you're generally speaking very close to an expert, but I'll give you the expert moniker there and say, this is going to be an enlightening conversation today, and lots of things going on too, just beyond your historical knowledge of the brand. So we'll hear all about that. But you know how I kind of start things. We typically lead with one's guitar journey. So we'll jump right in, and say, how did you start playing? What was your first guitar? Give us a little background there, and then we're going to weave everything together as we go.
Okay, so my guitar journey, I guess, starts with my family who don't like music. I was brought up in a family who the only things that were played was, if you're a member of the UK, Terry Wogan on a Sunday morning for breakfast. Terry Wogan's a BBC radio personality. ABBA, Cliff Richard, and Buddy Holly. That was pretty much all of the music I heard up until about the age of 13 or 14. So when I went to what we call secondary school, which I think may be something like high school for you, I was introduced to lots of other people. And at the same time, I was a paper boy. And a friend gave me a cassette, those old things that were big in the 80s, and said, you should listen to this, see what you think. So I got myself a personal stereo because I didn't have any cassettes up until that point, and then spent every day delivering papers 7 days a week, wind, rain, snow, whatever it was. And I listened to U2, pretty much was my introduction to music. And U2 probably are up there with my number one band. And The Edge is, should we say, an interesting guitarist. Some might not say a particularly technical one, but he does like his effects. So I listened to U2 for a very good couple of years. And I got the Police were in there, Ultravox, which is another British Scottish band, were there, and I kind of learned Kate Bush, a lot of British acts that were kind of coming out at that time. And then as I became around the age of 14, I kind of got a visual awareness. And from that point forward, it was almost the album covers were the things that got me into new music. I have to thank Andy Mulholland for that, someone who was a compatriot of mine at school. We would go to the record shops and in Kingston upon Thames, where I grew up, and just look at all of the 12-inch vinyl covers and go, that looks cool. Can we afford it? Let's buy it. And Iron Maiden became my next big act, and probably the first one where the guitar was obvious. Steve Harris's bass, Adrian Smith's guitar, all of that, Dave Murray as well. That kind of the whole thing was around the guitar for me, which U2 wasn't really. It was more around the stories of the songs. So Iron Maiden, and it was also good about the Iron Maiden album covers is that they did upset my mother, which was a decent thing. So Iron Maiden kind of started the guitar journey. And then I went to university, and on the way between school and university, lots of my friends that I made had bands, local bands. There was a band called Strange World. And again, if you're into prog rock, the bass player of the band called Arena, Keiran Amos, was in one of my favorite bands as a teenager, Strange World. And he's we hung out, got drunk when we were teenagers. So I spent a lot of my teen years going out to see mates on stage, playing guitars and making the noise. And then I was 17 in 1987 when Appetite for Destruction came out, which I think probably for people of my age was certainly the summer driving tape that was on everybody's cassette player in their parents' cars while they were learning to drive. So Slash would be probably a key thing. Other bands that had really good graphic designs would be Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd are another big thing, and so I'll move on to the next thing. So I went to university, had some spare cash, was working in the summer at a theatre, and one of my colleagues said, "I've got a guitar I want to sell. Does anyone want to buy it?" I'm like, "How much?" He was like, "Well, 100 quid." And I was like, okay, that sounds good. I've got 100 quid spare. I have no idea about guitars, literally none, other than the fact, hey, it would be cool to play a guitar like my friends who play on stages in the local pubs and venues around Surrey where I grew up. So I bought that guitar, and maybe different for a lot of your is that I still have my first guitar. As possibly can see by my head, I have a lot of guitars, and I'm not a hoarder. I'm not a collector as such. I'm a hoarder. I would say that I buy a guitar and think, hey, that sounds good or looks good or whatever. And sometimes they're broken. You'll see a number of the guitars on the wall behind me aren't put in perfect condition, but I like messing around. So I had this Hohner ST Special, which it turns out that Danish Pete from Addison's Guitar, this was also the same brand, the same model, first guitar. So, there's a little bit of a history there to that. It was black and white to start with. But as I mentioned to David when we started, my name, Keiran, means of the black. So my original rule is there's only one color for a guitar. It's black.
I love it, man.
The majority of my guitars are black, although, as you can see, I've got a couple of red ones and a white one and a blue one. But most of those ones, other than the Clipper 6, this one here, are because they've been given to me. Almost all of the guitars I've purchased, except for this Clipper 6, or the Clipper 6s I have, are black, because that's the only color for a guitar. Linking in, as we're going to be on YouTube, the other rule of guitars is, in buying guitars specifically, is from Mick of That Pedal Show. Wonderful YouTube channel. his rules are there are 3 rules to buying a guitar: what it looks like, what it looks like, and what it looks like. So that's pretty much how I've always thought about buying guitars. How does it look? So the Hohner started off black with a white scratch guard, and it was black and white, not black. So I investigated, how do you change the bit of plastic that's the scratch guard? I was training as a product designer at De Montfort University in Leicester at the time. There were a few other guitarists on the course, but there was no YouTube. There was no reference material, and there was no how to repair your guitar book in the library. So I found that I could buy a scratch plate from getting a guitar magazine, and I bought a scratch plate and it didn't fit. So I kind of made it fit. And then in doing that, I found actually that a guitar is a relatively simple tool. Maybe not as simple as a hammer or a broom, but it's certainly not a power drill or a table saw or anything like that. It's 2 bits of wood, 4 pieces of wire, a few magnets, and some potentiometers, and that's all stuff that was well within my wheelhouse. So I just spent the next number of years taking it apart and putting it back together, but not really learning how to play it, because again, there were no YouTube channels, there was no Justin Guitar or Andy Guitar or any of those other ones that I spend all my time now watching, learning the songs and doing things like that. So I spent a lot of time, as the sun comes out on my face, I spent a lot of time fixing the guitar, making the guitar make noise, but not really learning to play it. And then I met my better half, and we moved house a couple of times, and I was shipping my guitar and my very heavy amp around, and she said, learn to play it, or throw it in the bin. And as I've already said, I'm a hoarder. I don't like throwing things in the bin. So shortly after she said that, she also purchased me 6 guitar lessons with a local guitar teacher who taught me for about 12 years. So hi to you, Gary James. Hope you're doing well. And I went every week, because I knew if I didn't go every week, I would just stop learning. So, and I wouldn't be improving. So I did. And I think maybe, would it be a good idea for me to close the blind? I think it might be a good idea.
I was going to ask if it would be more.
Because I've got Venetian lines across my face. And apologies, audience, for that. If it doesn't get cut out.
There you go. It's better.
No,
you got you got the string holes through the
The sun really comes out in the UK, so it's good that we're experiencing that live.
Yes.
Okay, so I learned to play, focused on Pink Floyd songs, and I've always tried to learn how to play Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses. And Gary was one of these guitarists who liked to have a different guitar. Not every week, but it felt like to me, I'd turn up and he'd have another guitar that he'd been borrowing or trying out or whatever it was. And he bought a guitar that was had been used a little bit, been sat in his spare room. And he thought that I needed a better guitar than the Hohner. So he offered me, and it turns out for a pretty decent price, my second guitar, which kind of pretty much became my number one when I play in the couple of bands that I play in. I'm not saying I play well, I'm just saying I play. Which is my Les Paul Voodoo. And as you can see, it's probably to the pain of some viewers of this content, is that it's well used, like a decent hammer. And that's where I was at. And I stayed that way for quite a while. Played in the covers bands, we'd do a couple of gigs a year. And I was happy. I mean, who wouldn't be happy with a Gibson Les Paul?
Sure.
It's one of those, it's a classic instrument for a reason. It works, it does the job, it makes a sound. Try and make you sound like Slash, but that's it all comes in the fingers or something, isn't it? So that's where I was at. My next step on the journey was trying to find ways of allowing my band to have places to play. The music kind of arena where we were at the time had kind of reduced. There was less pubs. Pubs had gone to gastropubs, so they were spending much more time on quiet eating, family, food, and that sort of thing, because they weren't making, and still don't make, a lot of profit from selling beer, which is a bit weird for a public house, a bar, we call it the pub. So there were less venues and less places, and that sort of thing. So we moved into a new place, and I had an idea that I'd like to, I don't know, have a festival, maybe. So I got my friend's band, one of the greatest cover rock bands in southwest London, called Bungle's Finger. Please don't look that up on Urban Dictionary. Bungle won't mean anything to you if you are not British. It's a children's TV program called Rainbow, which is also connected to West End because they had the West End Rainbow. Rainbow, children's TV, Bungle's Finger. Don't look it up.
Okay.
They played. We put them on in my house. My band supported. We had 200 or 300 people in the garden, and the drummer in the band, said, "Well, that's a festival place where we live, Mogador. Has to be Mogstock." That was 14 years ago, and we've done every year, including through lockdown. We've done a version of Mogstock, and in fact, we're planning next year's at the moment. So I have then become running very small. I mean, we're talking 500 audience members at the top kind of thing at the moment. Yeah, there's always space to go. Moved it around. It's now in the farmer's field next to my house. And that's where I kind of was until maybe a year ago. I had been given as my first band, the drummer had been carrying a guitar around since she was 16, and thought that it would be a good idea to get it used. It had been in her loft, didn't have any strings on it. She had no idea. So she came on to rehearsal one day and said, "Look, why don't you take this guitar?" So this is where Westone comes into the mix. And she handed me a Westone Thunder 3, which isn't black. But it's a kind of pearlescent white turning to gold. Westone Thunder 3 version 3, and it's got the Westone Eagle, Raven, whichever you were, and it's a 19. See the serial numbers on that. Some people say it's 86. Some people say it's 83. I think it's an 86 one. And it was kind of interesting to me in the fact that it had a humbucker in the middle of the setup rather than at the bridge, which is possibly, HSS is where most people expect it to. It had the 3-position switch, but rather than going up and down like my Les Paul did, it goes forwards and backwards. Oh. And it has 3 other switches and 3 control knobs. I didn't know very much about guitars at that point in time. I didn't know what it was worth. I'd never heard of Westone. There literally was minimal for me on the awareness front, but I wanted to make it work. It had no strings on it, but when I restrung it, put the Rotor Sound yellow 10s that tend to be my default on it, it made a noise. But none of the switches did what I expected. So I joined the Westone forum because the internet actually existed at that point in time, and said, "Look, I've got this guitar. It's a Westone. It says it's a Thunder. It's a 3, but I see there's a 1 and a 2 and an A and a 3V and a what is it? Is it active? Is it not active? I have no idea." That's how little I knew of how the guitars were. And all the guys on the forum kind of said, "Take a photo, let me see what it is." Did that, And I kind of got involved and found out that, there's a phase cancellation. The humbucker has a split coil switch, and then there's turn on one of the single coils, turn off one of the single coils, and it's all makes it make different sounds. And that was great. Got involved, and then a character called Thorn, who ran the westone.info website, decided he'd had enough. He was done. He'd spent a lot of time researching the Westone brand over a number of years, but he was done, and he just posted on the forum, the westone.info website is a bounty of information, and it needs to carry on existing. Is anyone interested in taking it over? And I was working as a web developer at the time, and I had my own hosting supply and a whole bunch of things like that. So I just put my hand up and said, yeah, I can take it over if you want, or I can help you, or whatever. And he basically just sent me everything. Sent me the domain name, sent me the content, sent me everything, whilst it was all discussing in the background what was happening. And the whole committee thing is everyone's up in arms and not really paying attention to what's happening. Thorn just sent me the stuff, and I was like, okay, right. So I put it up and said, okay, there you go. There's the Westone info is now moved across. And Thorn said that he didn't want anything to change. He said he wanted it to stay exactly as he had put it. Now, it was a little old in the HTML front, so I asked him if I could update it, clean it, make it a little bit better to use. And he was happy with that, and it has stayed like that pretty much ever since. There hasn't really been any updates to it, but there hasn't really been a great deal of updates to Westone as a guitar manufacturer up until very, very recently. So I took that over. And then the politics of situations like that, someone else had actually copied the website because they didn't want it to go away either. So they wanted to just make sure that in all the infighting, it didn't just get thrown in the bin, throwing the baby out with the bathwater and all the rest of that. So they took a copy, and when kind of Thorn had retired or receded into the background, they then created a new site using WordPress that would be able to be updated with new information that had been found from new Westone owners, or when people had taken their guitars apart, they could give more information, because there were big holes in the information were there. There's a lot of guitars that had disappeared. No one had taken apart or seen the components were inside. The things that I want to say, what pickups is there? What's the impedance on those pickups? Is it the same on every single one? These are the questions that get asked of the website quite regularly. What does that switch do? Why does that switch do nothing? Which is something I'll work on the next guitar, and all of those things. So the person who had done that took this on, and the forum, which is still alive. If you go to either westone.info or westtoneguitars.net, which are the two websites, there are links to the forum. So if you do have a Westone and you want to find someone who has the same instrument and probably has taken it apart and investigated it, the first point of call is always Westone forums, which you'll find. The actual address of the forums is not easy for me to remember. So if you go to the Westone site, you'll find that. Or indeed, if you send an email to info@westone.info, you'll get an auto reply that says, thank you very much for your interest. If you want to find out more about guitars, go to because the biggest question is, how much is it worth? It's always the question. People say, how much is my Westone worth? And the answer is always, however much you can get someone to pay for it.
That's right.
Because they were anywhere between £150 to maybe £500, and probably $200 to $600 when they were sold in the US in the mid-80s. So they weren't, $1,000 Fenders or Gibsons. They were that kind of, $150 in 80s UK was still a decent amount of money for a guitar instrument, but not one that you would need to mortgage a house for.
Right.
And they've never really increased much more than that. There are some guitars, some Westones specifically, that gain surprising amount of money. And if you go on Reverb or eBay, you'll see people posting a price that they hope they're going to get, and you're going, Well, if you're lucky, and that's where you kind of get the value. If you can persuade someone that it's worth that, or they want it so much that they will pay that,
Right.
then it's worth that. But most of the time, it's just whatever value, a small amount of value. My kind of purchase price for a guitar is still that, somewhere between £150 and £500-600. If I have to pay more than that for a guitar, I know I can get the components and put them together and make a guitar that will do the same job, I think. Yeah. Being trained as a product designer, I'm all aware of designer brands and the kind of things that they get. The Fenders, the Gibsons, yeah, they're great. I've played a number of Fenders and I've played a lot of Gibsons. And they're wonderful instruments, but Gibson Les Pauls are bloody heavy, which is why I like the studio. And if you drop a Gibson, you're going to break the neck. So, there's a form and function things. They look great. They've got a great history, but I'm not sure I'd be throwing 5 figures at an instrument like that. So, yeah, kind of the journey on there is buy a hammer, and if you can change the bits to be your hammer, then that's the correct journey. If you think it sounds good, again, using another that pedal show phrase, it is good. It's a subjective point of view, isn't it? So that's at least the guitar to Westone journey. And as I've told David a few times, stop me talking, otherwise I'll just keep going.
Well, can we explore the Westone lineage a little bit? We didn't talk about this. So I always have wonderful offline conversations with all of my guests before we get going. And we were having one which we had to stop so we would actually record and go. But we didn't talk about, and it's like I feel like I know a fair amount about Matsumoku. Heaven forbid I'm pronouncing the name of the factory correctly. But they were a prolific builder and a wonderful, wonderful builder in Japan from the 60s into the late 80s. So they closed down shop in 87. Production moved to Korea for a few years. And then, that was essentially that. But at a time when Norland owned Gibson and CBS owned Fender, and the Japanese craftsmanship was getting better literally every hour, which came out of the gate being good to, if not very good. But the Japanese craftsmen became very wonderful builders during the 70s. And of course, that continues to this day. We're looking at a brand that is of exceptional quality. And so I'm trying to formulate my question. Can you speak to that some? I don't know, what your historical knowledge is of Matsumoku. And they put out guitars for many household names during their time. I guess where I'm going with this is that a $500 guitar from them could be better than a Gibson or Fender of that era. And that's one thing that makes them highly sought after and can drive prices up, but then also can fly under the radar because there's still a stigma. Some people, they're less and less, still have a stigma about Japanese produced guitars. Clearly they're not in the loop, but it does exist.
Yeah. It's one of those things that the Matsumoku, and again, your pronunciation, my pronunciation, I don't think anyone's actually ever heard it being pronounced. It's always been written down. So however you pronounce it,
Good. Thank you.
I say Matsumoku, but again, I have no idea. Didn't appear to have, or if they did, they were probably all in Japanese, and surprisingly, their guitars are very Western orientated. In fact, I guess a lot of the Japanese guitars of that period of time were built for export and import into the UK and the US. But their records never really got translated or existed or filtered out. So a lot of the information that we have, and that's what is on the Westone guitars and the forums, is a little bit of hearsay. There are a number of people that have come out of the woodwork who were involved. Westone US have got a few contacts of people who were involved in St. Louis music. We would probably pronounce St. Louis. You might pronounce St. Louis. God knows. But the SLM brand, which is probably how they're known, they were pretty much the importers of the instruments in the US, and a lot of the designs that they chose, because as you say, they made, from what my understanding of the reviews of, I think, Vantage and Aria Pro and a number of others that were all built in the same factory and have a similar fan base across the board that Westone have. And there are a number of fans who have, they're just Matt fans, and any guitar made in that factory, which was owned by the Singer sewing machine. And the reason it moved to Korea was partly because the marketplace was changing, but partly because the Singer owners just didn't want the factory anymore, so they closed it down, and Matsumoto had to make a decision. And I think the original creator of the factory may have been aging, and that thing with the family owning the family business and bringing it down, maybe the dedication to it wasn't as far. But again, this is hearsay. This is things that I've read on articles on the websites and from discussing things with the forums and reading around, but I have no gospel truth, such as that might be. There is no evidence of anything other than a little bit here and a little bit there, and timeline inspections, and detecting the serial numbers, which have particular codes that kind of say when they were built and where they were built and how they were built. But there are, especially say the Clipper, again, this one that I have over my shoulder, that came out of the factory near the end of the run. So in the kind of 85, 86, 87 timeline. And they say that they closed the factory to production in December of 86 and moved to Korea. The Samek factory is where most people think, and I have no reason to doubt that. So again, moving from a well-respected Japanese factory to a well-respected Korean factory at a point when the economic structure maybe wasn't working for whatever it was they're doing, plus other management stuff. So they moved, and there were a lot of parts that had been produced and not a lot of guitars made with those parts. And because it was moving from Japan to Korea, maybe some of the staff did move. I've heard stories saying that the production staff did move, but a lot would have stayed, because moving countries, especially maybe at that time, Korea wasn't possibly the best place to be moving to as a foreigner. So they bolted a lot of bits together. So there are a lot of guitars that have the serial numbers on the neck or on the neck plate, which is the worst place to put a serial number because that's the easiest thing to change over. And they had guitar parts, and they made new models or recreated existing models with just bits that appeared to me. Oh, there's a bit, bolted together, put it in a case or put it in a box, chuck it out of the factory, and probably created a really unique instrument. Just that one unique instrument, because they were like, we've got these bits, we're in a new home, where is that router? Where is that polisher? Where is, I don't know, we use what's ever in front of us, and we'll make 100 guitars in a day. And these people who are either brand new to the Matsumoto brands, because they were all made at the same time. And sometimes I think that there were one person who was making an Aria Pro and then a Westone and then a Vantage, and then coming back and doing another brand and then putting it in the rack to be sprayed and labeled, and you might get a different guitar each time, which is great because everybody's guitar is then already unique. But a lot of the people who come to the websites and the forum want to know why their guitar is different from someone else who says, no, a Westone Clipper 6 has to be this way, or a Rainbow, or a Concord, or whatever it is they've got, their own, or a Thunder, the ones that I have, can only be this way. And it's a good idea to take what they say, because their instrument, and again, there are guys who have got 10 Thunders or 3 Concords, and a friend of mine has a Concord, the black one that is just up here, is a Concord from 1983, and his is also from 1983, and they're completely different instruments.
Wow.
And so that's right at the beginning of the kind of famous 80s part. You know, it's kind of 83 to 87, or maybe 82 to 87 is the kind of big time of Westone. And you look at two guitars that supposedly are supposed to be identical, and the body shape's not even the same because they've got transition models. And so it is, as an archivist, which I can't say I really am, I've inherited the archive, and I do try to update it as and when I get information, but I don't want to put hearsay and this is gospel because I've got one example. So therefore, this is the way they all are, on a website where Thorne has actually, when he created it, from my understanding, had a lot of each of the individual instruments and sometimes a few models of each, so that he could do as best a job as possible. I don't want to muddy those waters too much. So that's, the historical, it is so, that kind of change of language, Japanese, which is a tonal language, to English, which is very, relatively straightforward. It just means that there's a whole bunch that might be missed in translation. We're working on a very difficult situation on that, but we're not also that concerned too much, because at least from my side, the UK side of Westone, and the Westone, my partners in Westone US have, we have a lot of similarities, but we have, as with every people, there are differences. For me, I'm very much a case of your guitar makes its sound with your fingers and the speaker in the amp you choose to plug it into via the pedals that will affect it. So you change the amp, you change the pedals, your guitar will sound different. Although many people say if David Gilmour picks up a guitar, it will sound like David Gilmour, which is, relatively fair point. But
yes,
that kind of focus on. Shall I start an argument in your comment section? Tone wood, and or the strings your guitar you use, I think they affect the sound. Everything affects the sound. Let me just put that. But the cable you use and the wood you use is going to affect it less than the way you play your guitar, and the pickups that pick up the way you play the guitar, and the speaker that throws that amplified sound out into the air are the things that are going to make the most amount of effect. So, I kind of have an issue that if your guitar is comfortable for you to play and you enjoy playing it, if it sounds good, it is good. Just keep being good, because you're just going to get better every time you play one guitar, or 10 guitars. Each time you play those guitars, you're going to learn them, and they're going to mold to you. You're going to mold to it, and it doesn't matter whether you've got you've got an Ibanez as there's here, or a Parkwood, which is here, or a Court, which is the red Strat shape back here, or a Westone, or a Gibson. If it's your guitar, just pick it up and play the damn thing. Stop hanging out on the wall.
To your point, talking about magic fingers, I would real quick. I was in Nashville a couple weekends ago. Was visiting a store and was talking to the guitar manager there, and he used to manage another store years ago. And Billy Gibbons, ZZ Top would come in for a while, somewhat regularly, and they had this hokey little amp. And I'm not giving the story. I'm not describing the story as well as the guy who told me the story, of course. And to just check out, it's just almost like a clip on your belt kind of a thing, amp. And so Billy just pulled a Telecaster off the wall, struck an E chord through this. It was a funky, cool amp, but it was, again, just kind of a thing. It was more curious than it was technical. And to your point about fingers, or to someone else's point about fingers, he said Billy played like it was, I think he said he played an open E chord. He's like, man, I've never heard anything that good in my life.
And one of the things that I've got a little bit of a history of, say, sound engineering. My dad was a sound engineer for their church, so I grew up in a kind of a boomy acoustic space. And there's a lot that can be said with what you think you hear. And I think playing back to Paul Kablinski's previous episode, he said the worst thing you can do, or the best thing you can do, is record yourself playing. And if you record yourself playing and then play it back immediately, you'll go, it didn't sound like that. I didn't sound that bad, or it certainly didn't sound like that. And you're kind of going, okay. And one of the things, again, having watched a lot of performers and seen if a performer has a problem, their performance does degrade because they've got a problem. And it could be a problem with their hair. It could be a problem with the pair of shoes they're wearing, or indeed if it's the guitar and it's their main tool. If you break a string on a guitar, you've got to be a damn fine player, Mr. King. If you can carry on playing without being kind of thrown sideways, it's that connection you have with your whole setup, whether it is a single Telecaster into a Fender amp, Pro Junior or Blues Junior or whatever. If you've got that affinity with it, it will always sound like you have that affinity to it. So the whole. Yeah, I'm part of it. I always, I want to sound like David Gilmour. I want to sound like David Grohl. I want to sound like Slash, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix. Don't we all? Oh, what guitar do they use? What strings do they use? What cables? What pedals? What amps? Doesn't matter. Half of them are dead, and half of them, they have their fingers. You don't. So sound like yourself. I think is probably the best thing you can. Which. Learn from them, play their riffs, learn how they play, without a doubt, definitely. Make you a better player. But I don't think it will change how you sound to your audience. I think is probably the key thing. And you're never going to hear how you sound to your audience. You cannot be that person that is hearing. You can't be you listening to Jimi Hendrix playing live in 1969 in London. Lucky you if you were there. But you can't be the receiver of your sound, so it's almost impossible to chase that, which is just something that I've tried to take on, but I'm not sure I can adhere to it either. But
I love that point. To be the receiver of the sound, I don't think I've ever thought of it that way, right? Because it is our interpretation of the player's ability of the sound coming from them, but it parallels the audience member's interpretation of a lyric. Yeah. And how it can mean it goes this way with art in general. It can mean this to you and it means this to me, and we're on opposite ends of the spectrum, like just craziness how far apart we are in our definition or how we interpret it. But I'd never thought about the interpretation of sound. That's a wonderful point, and that's so true. Yeah,
it's so I mean, again, from a sound engineer's point of view, if you are in a band, your extra member of your band is your sound engineer. It doesn't matter what you think. If you are a touring band, yeah, it's an extra expense. But if you can tour with your sound engineer, you know that your sound to your audience is going to be consistent throughout, because your sound engineer is the honest member of the audience. If your mum's in the audience and you say to mum, "How was my performance?" "It was lovely, dear. It was great." "Well, what about that time when I made a mischord?" "Oh, it was still brilliant." It's not honest because she's your mum and she loves you and all the rest of that. But your sound engineer, if you mess up, the sound engineer is going to heard you the day before and the week before or the last time you performed, and they're going to go, "Yeah, you didn't do that song quite as well as you did back in Nashville," or whenever it is. And that gives you the constructive criticism to hone your sound so it's consistent. I think that, and I again, kind of touring and performing in different. I'm not a touring musician. I'm a graphic designer. I would earn very little if I was on the road doing, Proclaimers covers. It would. But I, as mentioned, I kind of run a festival. I see a number of people perform quite regularly, and if they perform in a different venue, if the sound engineer hasn't been given the right information, and you've got to give the sound engineer of a venue, the O2 or Wembley Stadium, the kudos in the fact that they're going to get 1,000 bands coming through their venue, and they know their venue, so they're going to make them sound as best they can. But if the band have gone, "Oh, just make me sound, give me a couple of bits of reverb and make sure my monitor is great, and I'll sound brilliant," yeah, that's great, but they're going, "Right, how am I supposed to make this person sound how they want to sound?" Which again comes back, and we're not on a sound engineering podcast, but that's why you should always make sure your monitor mix is good, because again, the problem. If you've got problems with your monitor as a guitarist or as a vocalist, your vocals and your guitaring will be, if you can't hear yourself or your bass player or your drummer or your singer, you're going to be out of time and you're not going to know your guitar's out of tune, or you're not bending those strings quite as precisely as you want to. And it's all part of the performance mix. But as a bedroom guitarist, you're hearing what comes out of your amp, and it sounds great. It is great, and you are the greatest guitarist in the room at the time, which is all.
Love it. All right. So curious, kind of going back to Westone for a minute or two, distribution wise. So St. Louis Music owned the distribution rights for the United States, and they brought in a number of brands. There was Electra. We won't necessarily go there. There was Westone Electra, Westone Phoenix, and there was all this and that. How do you know anything about distribution numbers? If I'm going to look for a Westone in the U.S. right now versus in the U.K., would it be easier to find one in Europe than it would be?
I think, again, this is all very much hearsay and Chinese whispers. So the numbers of even how many were produced are unknown, at least unknown definitively. There are a lot of guessworks, and there are some people. Again, Thorn, I think, had a number of UK stuff, which my partner in the US has now received of sales ledgers and distributors, guitar shops and the like in the US. But with this international marketplace we're in now, certainly Western international, with Reverb and with eBay and with the shipping, international shipping. So to give an example, my compatriot in the US is very much more of a guitar collector and is endeavoring to make at least, maybe not a museum, but a representation of as many Westone models that existed as he can, as he goes through. And he found that a charity in the UK, we have something called charity shops, which are probably the closest to pawn shops in what I understand in the US. It's where people take the stuff they don't want, inheritance stuff, and they go to Cancer Research Shop or an Oxfam shop. Oxfam's probably the famous brand. And they just hand them over. They go, we don't have the space for this, have this. And you'll find Westones and Electras and Fenders, although they will go very, very quickly. If someone walks past and sees a guitar that looks like a Strat hung up in a charity shop in the UK, it will stay there for a day if you're lucky. Westones and the Japanese brands that aren't identical in shape and look to a Strat or a Tele or a Les Paul will stay there for a little bit longer. And now that those charity shops are selling on eBay, they've come to the fact that they've now kind of rather than have lots of individual shops on all the high streets in the UK, because our high streets are not doing very well, they've decided that they will have a warehouse. So the high streets are the receiving areas. People kind of bring stuff to the charity shops in the high street, and then they get pulled into warehouses dotted around the country. And then they've got people who go through them, clean them up, photograph them in a kind of Reverb or even a Sweetwater kind of way. Here is all our stuff. And it's not just guitars. It will be musical instruments and audio equipment and clothes and shoes and, in fact, any of the detritus of human life. And they will put them on eBay. And if you buy from those people, all of the money you spend will go to the charity that they're supporting, hence why they're called charity support. So my compatriot found that Cancer Research in the UK had a rainbow on there, a Rainbow 2, which is a kind of ES style, thin body, semi-hollow. Depends. Do you call it semi-hollow if it has a block down the middle, or is it hollow if it?
Yeah, you're on the right track. You got it.
Yeah, again, but I've had people say no, because words. So he saw that on eBay in the UK. He obviously had a reminder that there were Westones. And he asked me to bid on it, and he gave me a limit of the price, and we bid on it, and we won it. So the money that he spent on it went into Cancer Research in the UK, which is great. And then I brought it in, checked it over, cleaned it up, tested it, made sure that it was working perfectly well before I put it in a case and gave it to UPS to take across the Atlantic. And it was missing a couple of control knobs, which for that model it has a what are known as PEQ knob. So it's a 2 humbucker instrument, has this kind of typical Gibson layout where it's got 2 volume controls and 2 tone controls. But the tone controls, rather than being all on when it's at 10 and all off when it's at 0, has a midpoint with a notch in it. So it's all treble when it's at 5 and middle bunt when it's at 0, and then it's got a -5. So I'm not 100% certain that it actually sounds any different than, say, the tone controls on my Gibson. But it's just the fact that the labeling on the control knobs is rare and different. And it appears that maybe someone had thought, oh, I'll get rid of those. They could have broken, they could have fallen off, who knows. But they are rare. So it's possible that the previous owner had sold those to another Westone owner who had lost or broken or didn't have the right thing. And interesting, the numbers on the volumes are white and the tones are black, which is also very, very unusual. So there is also someone in the US who remanufactures these again, whether he made a remold or who knows. It's one of those things that people have done something because they want to, and then it can be a beneficiary to other people in the audience, the fans, which is something the Westone UK, as we mentioned in our pre-broadcast conversation, something that we're fully aware of, and we've come from being part of the fan base and still are part of the fan base. And we know there are hopefully thousands of other members of the fan base. And whilst I don't want to go, it's people owned and hey, you can all be part of Westone UK. To a certain part, if you've got a Westone and you enjoy playing it or looking at it or whatever, then you're part of the Westone fan base, and that's great. But I don't want to step on the other people who say, certainly in the UK, who produce parts or have a new old stock store of parts. There's a company in Anglia, which is kind of like on the East Coast, who are Matsumoto guitar and bass. And they've got Westones and a lot of other guitars that came from Matt's factory. And they're doing an amazing job of restoring a lot of guitars and bringing them more to how they were when they came out of the factory. Whereas Westone UK, what we're trying to do is take the original guitars that were certainly relatively unique to the UK, not totally, but very much more seen. So the Clipper 6, it's probably easier if I show Clipper 6, number one. This is the first Clipper 6 that I found and purchased it because it didn't look like any of the pictures that were on the website. Clipper 6, as you can see with this one here, has got one pickup. And it's not a humbucker pickup. It looks like a humbucker pickup, but it's 2 single coils that are joined together in a humbucker style, really close to the bridge. And it's got 1 volume control and 2 two-way switches that turn each of the coils on and off. So unlike a 3-way switch that you'd get on a Les Paul that will give you neck pickup, bridge pickup, and the 2 together, Westone say, right, you've got 2 switches that you can actually flick with 1 hand if you want to turn everything off, which you can't do with the Les Paul. You can do a kind of kill switch kind of aspect. They're both kill switches for the pickup. But if you go to the Westone website, no one was really sure how it was wired or what the insides were. No one had ever seen the insides. So this guitar came up on eBay in the UK, and as you can see, it is now set with a mini humbucker. It has now got the original Clipper 6 pickup in it, and the red tape is on there, so I know which pickup I'm dealing with when I'm testing it. But it's got 3 control knobs and 2 switches. So this control knob here and the 2 switches are where the original ones were, and then the original owner, who was probably picked it up in a charity shop, I don't know, whatever. However, the one thing that is also worth noting in our conversation is the 80s Japanese guitars, as also seen behind me. And in fact, all of the Harley Bentons and the cheap guitars that you can get anywhere in the world for any low price, the thing that they are and should never be precious. Again, my philosophy is a guitar's a tool, just like a hammer. If you hit a nail and the hammer's head flies off, you put a new head on, or especially if you've lost it down the growth and you want, whatever, you amend your tool to be how you want it to be. And I think, especially the cheap guitars, the rare guitars that one of your vintage rare guitar podcast members, participants, guests. Yeah. He's obviously, his business model is chasing those rare guitars that are 5-6 figures in size, and that's a brilliant thing. And my family would not allow me to gamble that amount of money on something that could actually lose money next time. And full kudos to the guy and his safaris. Sounds like a wonderful experience. But my kind of is at the other end of the scale, is where, hey, this Parkwood was a friend of mine used to be a sales rep for Cork Guitars, and they were closing down the warehouse. And he said, "Oh, you come up to the warehouse." And this Parkwood was sitting in bits on a shelf that had been returned to the warehouse to be repaired. Never got repaired. And I said, "What's happened to that?" I was going to go in the bin. Okay, well, not anymore. It's going to hang on my wall until I figure out how it works. And it's a free pickup. It's got piezo. It's got 2 mini humbuckers and none of the electronics. So, it's literally been ripped apart. So, my kind of ethos is that the guitar should be a building point, a platform for whatever experiments you want to do. And this, this Clipper 6 wasn't original from the factory. It had pretty much no original factory parts in it, other than the neck and the body. But it intrigued me because I was going, well, what is it? Any part of it part of the factory? And yeah, it isn't. So it's now my test bed for when I take the parts of the Clipper 6, get those reproduced in the UK, and possibly, the neck may come from other suppliers, because necks you kind of need to have quite a manufacturing plant to make a guitar neck. Mm-hmm. But that's also one of the unique things. It's the interface the guitarist has with the guitar, so it has to be right. And it's just finding the person who produces the right guitar so that we can cut the headstock in it, position the tuners in the right place. So at this moment in time, Westone UK are in the prototyping stage of trying to identically replicate the Clipper 6, because it's a UK instrument. According to all research, it didn't get sold anywhere else. And therefore, I think as it came to the end of Westone's journey, FCN were the company that had the distribution rights in the UK at the tail end. And there were a couple of other places that rumored to have distribution rights, but it's really difficult to find who was actually selling them, because there weren't. Denmark Street in London has a lot of guitar shops, but you'd be lucky if you found a guitar shop in every other high street in the UK. When I was a teenager in the 80s, I can remember 3 guitar shops. Wow. And probably one of them was Anderton's in Guildford, and that's probably the only one that's still around in a similar way. So there was one in Guildford. There was Bell's Music in Kingston, which was the one that was nearest to me, and supposedly FCN and Bell's Music were connected, but I can't find any definitive evidence. And Bell's Music was where Eric Clapton would have bought some strings at some point. And there's one in Kew, Chandler's in Kew would have been another guitar shop, again, well regarded, but I don't think Bell's is no longer in place. I'm pretty certain Chandler's has closed down. At least there's a retail. I think they have repair and guitar building aspects. But so all of the guitar shops that were around in the 80s do not exist anymore. We have a brand called Guitar, which is a bit like Guitar Center, but from all accounts, I've never been to a Guitar Center, but from what I've read, they're not well regarded. Whereas Guitar, if you want to buy a guitar and you want to buy a Fender or a Gibson or an Ibanez or an Orange amp, or in fact, you just want to go and buy a guitar, are within walking distance of the house. So, and as with all these places, the staff are usually a wealth of knowledge and experience. So, to come back to your question, which I took as long as answering as you took in formulating, I have no idea, but I would suggest if you want to buy a Westone, eBay is the place to go. Reverb have rare examples most of the time, and quite possibly are more likely to be at a higher price. Reverb does tend to have a higher price, but you're more likely to get what you expected, I think, if you go to Reverb. But the prices, they vary. And again, if it's too expensive, there's going to be another guitar of a similar age or a similar quality. If it came out of Matt's factory, and one thing I guess I'm maybe not expecting, but if me talking this way means the prices of Matsumoku guitars go up, then that's a good thing. But for the people who own them currently, but not for the people who may want to get into them. But yeah, look at charity shops, pawn shops. I think that anywhere around St. Louis where SLM were based would be a good starting point. But the record, I don't have any access to kind of local records in the US. I can only really, so again, Westone US are very much more the experts on that area.
Okay. Well, it's Matsumoku guitars and the fine Japanese guitars of the 70s and 80s are the prices are continuing to rise stateside, and it's not impossible, but your entry point's going to be, from what I see, upper hundreds to around $1,000 depending on the guitar, and that would be kind of more of a baseline. I don't know, for example, what a Prestige. Well, there was a Prestige, what, at 150 and 250 in the
they're kind of the later carved top instruments, and I've never seen one. I'm not 100% sure Panteras and Prestiges actually made it to the UK. I've only ever seen photos, and there's a possibility they may have been on the UK price lists, but no one ever ordered them because they were unknowns or they weren't played by anyone famous. Because I know Tony Rabin of Yes played some Westone guitars, and there's a few big names, maybe not the hugest names, but other than Status Quo in the UK, which when they were playing Westones or were a signature dealer, they were not as respected as they had been 10 years ago. They were kind of like the band that started in the 60s, absolutely killed it in the 70s, took a break, and then came back in the mid-80s with In the Army Now and a couple of other songs. And I think, they were maybe coming on the back of the Poodle Hair Rock kind of thing, but they're not really. They're a blues rock band. But they kind of came back in, and I think Westone in the UK went, they're a big band. They may be a little easier to get hold of than whoever else was around at that time, and will suit our kind of demographic. But it's the Panteras and the Prestiges and a lot of the other ones didn't really come into the UK, at least as far as I'm aware, although in the comments there will be a UK Westone forum member who will say that I don't know what I'm talking about, which, to be honest, is a fair point. They will know more about their guitar than I do. That's without a doubt.
You've got, speaking of interesting guitars, you have a fascinating bass somewhere within arm's reach. Can we do?
Yeah. So again, going back to the product design side of things that are just weird. do stuff that don't make sense. Their form doesn't quite follow their function, or does it? I put a reminder on eBay when I got the Thunder for other Westones, because I was part of the forum and it sounded interesting. And this came up, and it was close to me, Putney, which is another relatively well-known town on the outskirts of London, and there are some music links to it. And I was living in Tooting nearby, so it was a motorcycle ride away, and the price was decent. But mainly it was black, because that's the only colour for a guitar. And it just did not look like any guitar should look. And I didn't play the bass at that point in time, but I was interested in this. And to kind of go back on the price thing, we have the rail, the Westone headless 4-string. It's a short to medium scale bass, so I can actually fit a bass guitar and an electric guitar, 6-string guitar, in the same guitar case, because this is so short. It is, it's difficult to do without me backing out, but I can, my bass guitar is this big. It's just tiny compared to, say, the red guitar, which is actually behind my head here, which, it's a Fender bass replica, and it's another foot longer than this one. But the main thing for me was, what the hell is this? How does that work? What's the sliding pickup? And all of the mechanics of the guitar are in this single block. Volume control in a really weird place, and it has to say this is a weird place to put a cable if you're playing live and you want to change it.
Yeah.
So I one of the things that I've added to mine is the little Velcro strap, so the cable runs through here and then runs underneath and lines up. But it's just, I didn't even know headless guitars existed when I found this. And that guitar now on Reverb, I've seen it listed as a $1,200 purchase. Wow. I'm not sure anyone's ever bought it at that price, but I've seen purchases on. This is a guitar that was very much more US orientated and very rare in the UK. I've seen eBays in the UK maybe 3 or 4, but I see maybe one every 6 months in the US. Yeah. And the last one I saw purchase went at $740, I think it was. I bought that for £100 with its original case, which is a nightmare. You don't want to put that in original case because it's a flock interior. It's a silver, shiny spaceman suit exterior, and I should have got it out maybe, but it's in a cupboard. And inside is a red flock interior, and it's a black guitar. You can get white ones and white, red, and black ones, and it possibly would be okay with the red guitar. But when I got this out of the case, when I first received it, it was just covered in red flecks and flocks of material, all the way up the ebony fretboard, all under the strings, everywhere in it. And it needed a clean. It hadn't been used. Again, that kind of eBay thing where probably some guy, I hope, had been given it or had inherited it or whatever the situation was. But whoever thought that was a good idea, it's a gig bag that is kind of wedge shaped and has zero protection for the instrument. But again, trying to find a flight case for that, it's just, to get a flight case will cost me more than it cost me to buy the instrument, which is fine. If it's worth, again, how much you can get people to buy, £800, which people are listing it for, then a flight case is worthwhile. But it's a tool, it's not an heirloom. It would be great if my kids think it's an heirloom, but I'm pretty certain as soon as I'm in the grave, my daughters are going to go, let's see all this crap, let's skip it. We'll skip, as in the UK, a skip is a metal box you put outside your house and throw your rubbish in when you're
okay.
That we call it a skip. I have no idea what you call it in the US.
Dumpster.
Yeah, I suppose it would be a dumpster, but my view of a dumpster is it's like a big plastic bin with a lid on the top.
Typically metal, but with a plastic lid. So you're halfway there. Yeah.
Whereas a skip in the UK is kind of there we go. It's shaped like that.
Okay.
And it's made out of metal, a box like this, and it's yellow. Usually, I mean, you can get in different colors. And it literally is just a big open metal container that gets picked up by a truck and put on the back. And if someone has just moved into a new house or is refurbing their house, such as my neighbor is currently, it will be outside their house for months and months. And it would probably be similar to dumpster diving, I guess, which is the kind of thing. There are people who go past and see a skip that someone has just moved into a house and this stuff has been left in the house that they have and it'll just get thrown in the skip. And people will kind of like, that might be useful. Yep. So yeah, that throwing it in the skip is everyone in the UK knows what I mean when I say that.
Well, and since COVID, scrap wood has never been more valuable.
And that's actually one of the things that Westone UK are investigating. We have a very eco basis. We want to. I'm a scuba diver, so the rule in scuba diving is you take only photos and you leave only bubbles. So Westone is taking on that kind of aspect, and in Mogstock, the festival that I run, it's take only photos and leave only footprints. We minimal. This is our plastic cup. So if you buy a plastic cup at Mogstock, you take it away with you and use it to market and advertise our festival. But there's no single-use plastic. We leave the farm the way we found it, if not better than the way we found it. Yeah. So we're looking at, again, on that tone wood thing, no one knows what that wood that was made of. It's likely it's going to be alder, but it's so heavily painted with what I guess is the standard guitar paint of the next door neighbor car finishing workshop, where they're just spraying it with cellulose or whatever it is that they've got on their on their shelves. For that, I've shown it to a couple of I've taken the body of my test bed rather than my reference, and I've shown it to a couple of woodworkers. They're going, could be anything. Who knows? It's literally the neck pocket is the only bit that's not painted, and yeah, they know it's not oak or mahogany or any of the maple or anything like that because of the color, but it could just be pine for all we know. So one of the things that we're looking for, and as we're going to be using CNC machines, and I know there's a whole bunch of people, especially those in the great guitar build off, that go, CNCing is not building a guitar. No, it is. It's just using a different tool, and the tools that we've created that are called computers are not chisels, and chisels are really difficult to use effectively. And Matt did not use chisels; he used CNC machines. So we've got plans with the CNC and the three-dimensional models, and using all of the tools we've got at our hand, and hopefully we're going to look at doing some recycled woods, and if possible, if say someone has, again, Brian May being a great British guitarist who built one guitar out of his mantelpiece and fireplace in his parents' house. If someone say, I want that guitar in that shape, it would be a Westone guitar in Westone shape, and we want it made out of this bit of wood that we have inherited, we found, we've got, whatever, then I have no issues with, as long as the bit of wood is coherent enough and capable of sustaining what it needs to have six strings tuned to 440 tuning or drop C or whatever it is they want to do, then I have no problem going, right, let's see. But if it's an expensive bit of wood, I'd much rather they got a pallet, and again, Tim Sway kind of view, pallet wood and old doors. And so I've got there are a few people who are we're working together who are very experienced in using recycled wood. So we're looking at maybe our first prototypes may actually be recycled woods rather than whatever the final wood for the production model is, because we can experiment, and if we can find something new and different that adheres to the old history and legacy of Matt's factory output, then we'll go for that. But we're not planning on it being hand built luthier quality. Ben of Crimson creates amazing guitars, and some of his hand builds are just truly crazy and amazing. And we may burn a few of our Westones, but yeah, we're looking at kind of small run production. I suppose would be the best way of describing our our next goal. Let's not say end goal, our next goal. But we're in the prototype stage at the moment. So
I love that. And starting with the one that was essentially not necessarily meant to be, but essentially exclusive to the UK. Very, very logical, cool start. Yeah. All right. So as we kind of look towards wrapping, I know there's one or two things we've maybe left off, but that's okay. One is all the links that we want to include, I will link into the comment section. So we'll make sure the audience has that. You came prepared with a book recommendation, and I don't want to skip that. So please.
Yeah, it's worthwhile. So whilst I think I'd had the westone.info website for maybe a year, 18 months, and an author, Terry Burrows, was writing a book, and his publishers were looking for photos. So he'd written the descriptions of all of the elements that he wanted to leave in put in the book, but he didn't have photos of a lot of the instruments he was describing and discussing. And he got in touch with me via the website, the Westone website, and asked me if I had access to the photo of the Thunder 3. Now, this was the Thunder 3 version 1, which had 2 humbuckers, but he just said Thunder 3. And I was like, okay, interesting conversation. We may have, or we may be able to get photos taken. And he was looking for library photos of a particular style, because all of the guitars. So it was the book, I'm doing this when you're in mirror, 1001 Guitars to Dream of Playing Before You Die, was the book he was writing. And they had library photos of each of the models. And he said, well, it was this specific one, and the image on the website was not ready for print. Being a graphic designer, I know how much high resolution you need to have to print something in a book. And I said, we've got a picture, it's watermarked, it's ancient, and it's tiny. We're talking like 400 by 300 pixels. So in this day and age, just not ready for print. But I said that, I've got contacts with other people who may have, and via the forum and things like that, I found someone that had the specific model, because it found out that the Thunder 3 I had was not the Thunder 3 that he wanted. Mine was the version 3, he wanted the version 1. So we got a guy on the forum to take his Thunder 3 and place it in the right light with the right background so it could be easily cut out. And we sent it off to them, and my payment request, for want of a better word, was just to have a couple of copies of the book so that I could have a copy, because it's got a Westone in it. And the guy who put the effort in to take the photos and do all the work also got a copy. So I sent one to him. And then when I received the book, I found that I did actually have 2 other guitars that were in the book. So the Les Paul Voodoo that I had from very early on in my guitar journey was on page. See, I actually highlighted the pages. Is on page. Page number 792 of 1,000 Guitars You Want to Dream of Playing Before You Die. The Westone Rail from 1985, which seems to make sense, is on page 599, and then the Westone Thunder, of which I have a version of, is on the other page, which is 557. So I've only got 997 guitars to obtain before I die. So
your wife will not have a problem with that, I'm sure.
My normal response to that is, she's not my wife.
Oh man, well listen,
she is my better half. She who must be obeyed.
I got it. This has been so much fun. This is great. A wealth of knowledge and information. So again, I'll make sure I include all the appropriate links. What a journey, what a story, and really fascinating where you want to take Westone and what's coming, down the road in the next several years, and really exciting. And I applaud you for reviving the brand, or help. I know there's other folks that have kept it alive. Yeah. And I'll clarify, and that are also helping to revive the brand. But I applaud all of you to doing so, and really look forward to see what's coming ahead.
I'm looking forward to it as well. Thank you,
Keiran. Thanks so much for your time. Everyone, thanks so much for your time. Keiran, if you'll just hold on just a second, we'll wrap up the show. It's a couple clicks out, but everyone, thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next round. Thanks for tuning in to the Guitar Gavel podcast, and a special thanks to Steve Kuykendall for composing this music and being such the great guy and friend that you are. As a reminder, hit the subscribe button and sign up for our twice weekly newsletter at guitargavel.com.